Okay, so now we can go on to the meeting in hand. And we have the extreme good fortune to have Mr. Darrell Nair and Mr. William Herlock with us from EFIT. And I see we have Deputy Chief Lowe with us also. And Acting Deputy Superintendent Pat Cottrell. So, good evening, Deputy Chief Lowe. Very nice to see you. So the goal is to discuss the progress progress of the. Philip, do you have the questions in front of you and the?
Yeah, generally.
You want to address it because you were the one that composed it.
Yeah, the first was just talk about the progress in the IAD Force Division and the investigations that they're completing, and also training people to complete them, and getting the division ready. And the second question is about the use of their findings. Particularly, we're interested in using those findings for talking about like in-service training of field officers and tactics that would lead to force reduction or reduction of the excessive use of force.
Before we go into it, I'd love to have Mr. Herlock and Mr. Nair introduce themselves. They are the members of the External Force Investigation Team. How long has it been part of, you've done how long now? It's not as long as a year, is it? Is it 6 months?
No, it has not yet.
So it's almost a year, or is it?
It's a little less than a year right now. EFIT came about in February of 2021 with a stipulated order signed by the federal court. And then in May of 2021, we were awarded a preliminary contract by the city, which allowed me to hire my executive team. Bill Herlock I'm the administrator of EFIT. Bill Herlock is the deputy administrator. And then our lead supervisor is Darrell Bone. We worked very closely at the time with Deputy Chief Lowe to put together the groundwork for what EFIT was going to be. Once the full contract was awarded in July 16th, actually 2021, we went live with EFIT and responding to calls with IAFD.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you were chosen? You weren't just
not sure why I was chosen. You could ask DP Lowe and that question, but we're honored to have been chosen. So again, my name is Darrell Nair. I spent 20 years in the prosecutor's office in New Jersey, commander of internal affairs and complex white-collar crime and political corruption. After I retired from the prosecutor's office, after 20 years, a little over 20 years of service, I went to my firm where I headed up their internal investigation group working on national and international matters. We monitored the construction of One World Trade Center, making sure that went up without fraud, waste, and abuse after the attacks of 9/11. Did a lot of national and international work. Part of that was police reform work. I was the #2 independent investigator in Maricopa County, involving Sheriff Joe Arpaio and looking at some backlog matters there for a few years. So Justice Department knew of our background, or my background, and asked if I'd be interested in applying for this position. It's hard to say no to the Justice Department, so I convinced Bill Herlock to be my #2 on this project. It's hard for Bill Herlock to say no to Darrell Nair, and here we are. So let me turn it over to Bill, and he can introduce himself.
Yes, thank you, Darrell, and thank you all for inviting us to speak with you this evening. We greatly appreciate the opportunity. As Darrell said, I'm Bill Herlock. I have the privilege of serving as the number 2 on the EFIT team. My background, I am an attorney, have been I'm a former federal prosecutor, was investigating cabinet officers in the District of Columbia once upon a time. Have a very active law practice nationally. In my spare time, the little bit that I have, I'm also the deputy mayor and first ward councilor for our township here in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a population of about 42,000 people, 12 miles due west of New York City. Due east would put us in the Atlantic Ocean. Due west of New York City. Have the privilege there of serving on the Public Safety Committee. Also worked very closely with our police department. They just recently got an accreditation. I was part of that executive team that assisted with that exercise. Also admitted to practice in the federal court in New Mexico as well, and look forward to speaking with you all this evening and answering whatever questions you have for us. Thank you.
And Deputy Chief Lowe, would you like to introduce yourself and say what your position is?
Hi, Rowan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deputy Chief Corey Lowe. I was the interim commander at the time in IAFD when we brought on EFIT. Currently, right now, I'm the Deputy Chief over the Accountability Bureau, which means I'm doing the same thing I've done in the last 4 years, which is working everything the settlement agreement related.
But you're professional now, not acting.
Yes, ma'am. It's official.
Unlike, I can't say it every time. Can I just call you Deputy Superintendent? So if you could introduce yourself and say what your position is.
Yes, I'm Zach Cottrell. I'm currently the acting Deputy Superintendent of Police Reform. Before this, I was the commander over internal affairs for the last 2 years. As Deputy Superintendent, I'm currently over internal affairs and our internal affairs force division, and do work closely with Mr. Herlock and Mr. Nair of EFIT.
Okay, let me frame this a little bit before we start. The monitor's report came out in June, and the most recent EFIT report came out last month. Am I correct in that?
The
Yes.
most recent IMR came out in November, Rowan.
Oh, yeah, I thought so. I knew it was November. But they finished in June. They did their investigations and were done.
They finished July 31st of each year, and then we get that report in November of each year, and then the next one will go through, will be filed in May.
So what's EFIT's time frame for between your findings and the report?
So the EFIT team files quarterly reports every quarter. So we filed 2 quarterly reports. Our next quarterly report will be issued on May 16th.
So there's a little less time between your reports and the time the monitor's done his investigations, done with his investigations and issued his report. So you are the most recent report.
That's correct.
And it would be interesting to hear well, to begin with, the first question, has there been a substantial change in investigations? Is there obviously more investigations done and dusted?
So
anybody can answer that.
yeah, so let me kind of frame that a little bit for you. So EFIT works very closely with IAFD. We have a team. We have 3 teams of investigators that have a supervisor assigned to it, and we respond 24/7 to call outs with IAFD and conduct a joint investigation with IAFD. We're also there to mentor, to teach, to train, to put best practices forth, to make recommendations. Obviously, all we can do is make recommendations, right? We can't force anybody to do anything, but we do make recommendations all the time based upon what we're seeing. Our investigative team, our investigators are all very, very seasoned internal affair investigators. Some have homicide experience besides that. Some have tactical experience as tactical operators. but all very, very seasoned individuals. So in our report, you can see quarterly the progress that is being made. Substantial progress. Substantial's a relative word.
Yeah.
I think that we've from May when we started looking at what at the level of expertise, at the level of detectives, at the level of civilian investigators that were being brought on, and we are where we are today. It's night and day. So I think we're making a lot of progress. I think there's a lot more we need to do before we can turn the reins, as you were, back over to IAFD. But I think we're making a lot of progress.
Let me briefly interject there. Deputy Chief Lowe, perhaps you would be the best person to explain exactly what IFD is and what it does.
Of course. So the Internal Affairs Force Division was created in 2018, and the whole in that same time frame, we went to a 3-tiered use of force process. So we have 3 levels of force. We have levels 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is less likely or not likely to cause injury. And then 2s and 3s are likely to cause injury all the way up to officer-involved shootings. And so the Internal Affairs Force Division investigates 2s and 3s alone, and level 1s that include a rank of higher of sergeant or higher who applied force for level 1s. So they actually take on the majority of the investigations. And we've been doing so since 2018, and we started off strong, kind of dropped a little bit, and then that's when EFIT came into play. And I will slightly disagree with Mr. Nair. I think we've made significant progress. He said that we made a lot, and we really, and I agree with him, we have a long way to go, but we have made from the inside looking, from where we were last year to here, it's night and day. And just to put things in a little bit of perspective, we just completed the progress report, and in there, all uses of force within since EFIT went live on July 16th, all the way to January 31st of 2022, all level 2s and 3s were completed within timelines. That is one of the major criticisms that we received in the past. We did have 11 cases assumed by EFIT because we were coming close to the deadline, and we didn't want to, like, EFIT's one of their requirements is to not let any case go beyond the required timelines.
Which
so it's 90 days. So it's 60 days for the investigation, and then a 30-day review for 90 days. And then a 30-day option to extend, but we haven't had to have any extensions except for one OIS that happened in August.
OIS?
Officer involved shooting, sorry, ma'am. Okay. And so one of the things in there, and so again, they did take 11 cases, but that's out of 157. So that gives us 146 that we completed on time, which is 92%, which is well beyond what we did in the year prior. So having EFIT here is extremely helpful, and I think we're only going to get better as time goes on.
I guess this is a question for Mr. Nair and Mr. Herlock. What did it look like when you came in?
Bill, you want to take that?
Thank you, Daryl. A couple of things too, real quick. Going back to the reports that we were just talking about.
Let me just say something first. I see we have a lot in the chat and a lot in the two in the Q&A. I'm going to ask you to wait until this is done, and then we'll have a chat, question and answer time after that, so we don't have to keep breaking in. So, sorry, Mr. Herlock, go forth.
Perfectly fine. Thank you. On the reporting aspect of what we've been doing, our quarterly reports, I think it's really important to keep in mind too, the documents that created us, EFIT, the stipulated order and the agreements with the court, as well as the parties. There is no requirement for EFIT to make any reports. Mr. Nair and I felt early on when we took on the assignment in the spirit of openness and transparency that we were going to make quarterly reports, and that's what we've been doing, and we will continue to do so. What did it look like when we came in? There definitely were some issues that needed to be addressed. for sure, on a lot of range of topics, if you will. From the interview process itself, the way interviews were conducted, the manner in which they were conducted, where they were conducted, how they were conducted, was of concern. We were able to work very closely with IAFD to effectuate some serious and substantive changes very early on in the process, so that we set up interview rooms where these could be done. It was more of a professional setting, if you would, going forward, which has been a tremendous help. Again, the tone and tenor for a lot of this is what's very important in these types of matters. And we thought that needed to be taken up a notch, and IAFD worked closely with us to do so. In addition, we're happy to see the progress that has been made with many of the investigators, whether they're the civilian investigators or they are the sworn officers, the detectives that are in the IAFD department itself. In fact, we've implemented a plan very recently where we are starting to have the investigators and detectives do their own interviews. We work closely with them to format a plan. And then once that plan has been effectuated, they can go and do the interviews, and then we will watch after the fact, or if there's questions that come up. So we do see progress. I have to agree with DC Lowe on that aspect as well. So when we first came in, there definitely were issues that needed to be addressed. That's why we're here. We were able to identify those fairly quickly in the process, implement changes, and go forward from there, including, not just the interviews, but the way things were being conducted on site. Documents weren't being collected correctly or completely. The way that the actual scene themselves were being handled were problematic in many ways. And we were able to work again with IAFD very closely to have officers go through the process and then return back to the field as well, so that we were able to cover a lot of different fronts, because we know there's a lot of concerns with the city of Albuquerque as well. Darrell, did I miss anything?
Yeah, I'm gonna use DC Lowe's word, insignificant now. That's the one part that I am seeing the significant change and significant progress, as Bill said, is in the interview. And conducting interviews, the tone and tenor is a lot different than when we came in, significantly different. I'll use that word again, DC Lowe. So we have about 10 out of the 25 detective/investigators assigned to IAFD that are in what we call the interview transition plan. This is a three-tiered plan. Once they're done with that interview transition plan, they'll be able to conduct interviews on their own. That's the first step in being totally released without EFIT supervision. So we are seeing some significant changes as we go through that transition. DC Lowe and I and Mr. Herlock worked hard to develop a process narrative, which is filed with the court. And in this process narrative, it's how, the detectives step by step, what they need to do to complete an investigation. That document is filed with the court. And that's how we grade the detectives and how we rank the detectives with what they're doing. We developed the rubrics, which is based on the process narrative, and we go through that as we're closing cases out. We do the final sign off before the case is closed.
I know that I had a question. Does anybody else on the council have a question while I gather my thoughts?
I do. So you mentioned that 10 of the 25 investigators are, in this process of becoming independent. What about the other investigators that are not in that process? What's happening to them?
Yeah, the other investigators we're working very closely with are, obviously our goal is before we leave, they have to have a 95% compliance rate with that process narrative. So the goal is to move them in there. IAFD, based on bringing people in or people bidding into come into internal affairs is it's hard to have people voluntarily come into IAFD. We have 4 civilian investigators just starting. We have people at different levels, different stages of their career. So we work with everybody. So they're still doing interviews with EFIT. We were talking just a couple hours ago about releasing 1 or 2 more into the transition plan. So as they're ready, we don't wait till a next quarter or next month. When we feel and our investigators feel that they are ready, the executive team will review that, and whether it's 1 or 4, we'll put them into the transition process when we deem that they're ready for that.
Just for the people who are watching who maybe haven't read this stuff like we have, my understanding from the Monitor's 14th report last November was that about 1% of level 2 and 3 reports were done on time or in a timely manner. And if I understand Commander Lowe correctly, it's now up to it was 92% in this last time span. Is that correct?
% overall, but on 11 cases, we needed EFIT's helps in order for us to not miss a timeline. But to do it on our own, still with EFIT jointly doing it with us, we were at 92%. So if you just look at it, I mean, that's just a massive improvement over in what I consider a pretty short period of time.
Okay. So this is about how the division is working, correct? Okay.
Yes.
What is the difference between the civilian investigations and the APD? Is there any difference in level? Is there any difference in experience? Is there any difference? Just, that's a very basic question. I'm just curious why there is.
That's a great question for the deputy superintendent to answer.
Okay,
I'll take that one, Roland.
Thank you.
I think Daryl touched on it quickly, that we're having issues when we're required to have 25 investigators in IA Force Division. Finding 25 officers on this department that are willing to go there was very tough. So we kind of went out little something different, and we started hiring civilian investigators to come in and supplement our sworn officers in that role. They go through the exact same training. They have the same expectations. They're held to the same standard. And we started this process about a year ago. Actually, myself and DC Lowe did, when we started going through putting the job description together, getting authorization for the hires and all of that. And I can tell you that it's actually been very successful, much more successful than I even thought it would be. I will say that some of our investigators, the civilian ones, are moving along quickly in the process. EFIT has moved several of them into phase 1. They're part of that 10. And it's a good way to show that we're not using just sworn to do investigations, that we can hire civilians. Most of them have a background in some kind of investigative work, whether it's with CYFD, probation, parole, something like that. But it's been very successful, and I'm very happy with the way it's working.
If I may ask really quickly, sir, just so the public knows, what is the minimum amount of time a police officer would have to be on the force before he was considered for an IAFD position?
There's actually no minimum requirement. We do have a couple, I think 2 or 3 right now that are in there that have only been on the police department for about a year. While that's not ideal, because they don't have experience as a police officer, we don't stick any kind of requirement on there, just due to our staffing shortages.
I thought that might be the case. Is it a popular position? I think something that one of you said at the beginning was, is it hard to get sworn officers to participate in IAFD, or is there any incentive? Is there an incentive?
It's not a popular position just because of the stigma that's attached to being an internal affairs investigator. You know, there is a little bit of a stigma attached to an officer investigating another officer. I will say that. I think we have been able to show that it can definitely enhance their career, though. There's a lot of things you can learn being an internal affairs investigators, either professional standards, which is the normal IA function, or force division. There's a lot that they can learn that can actually supplement or help either later on in the career, or if they do choose to go back to the field, their knowledge of force investigations can only help other people around them.
Is there any other questions? We can now address the questions in the chat and the Q&A. So let's have a look. IFT's done through.
Rowan, I have a few questions on staffing, if I might.
Okay, go for it while I'm looking through these.
What's the breakdown between the sworn detectives and the civilian investigators?
I believe currently as it stands, we have 14 sworn and 11 civilian. If I'm pretty sure I'm right on that.
Okay, and that, I mean, when EFIT had its first or the second report, I think there were 31 investigators total.
That's correct. So we did have 31. We did have, I think, 3 get promoted to sergeant. So they can, go out. They're actually back out in the field now as sergeants. We did have 1 civilian move to another position within the department. I think we're back down to right at 26 right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Have you found that sworn investigators, detectives, have bid out of the IA department when they get a chance?
We have had some, I will say that, but we've also had several that have been here for quite a while. I do have 2 sergeants who have been here since the inception in 2018. And we do have several of younger detectives now who are learning that this is a good position for them on the department. And I think we have a lot of buy-in, especially with EFIT's help here, where there's a little bit more direction on what needs to be done. We've gotten buy-in from the younger officers now that I think we're going to have more stability now, and that's only going to help improve our investigations going forward.
The report, the quarterly report said that you were looking for incentives to encourage the detectives to stay, the sworn detectives to stay. Have you initiated any of those, or what are they that you've initiated?
Yeah, we actually have. A big one that was just actually signed in January in the new collective bargaining agreement is you get a yearly bonus for being there. So after your first year, you get $1,200. Second year, I think it goes up to $2,500. Third year, up to like $3,600. And that can be a big deal, I mean, everyone likes money. So every little incentive like that. We're actually working on another incentive that will probably be a little bit further down the road, where if a detective does at least 2 years in IA, then they'll get so many points towards promotion. And that's kind of a way to show that what you can learn in IA can help you, throughout your career. And that's one way to reward them, is through promotional points, so that they can be supervisors on this department.
Good. Now the 11 civilian investigators you have those 11 been with you since EFIT started? Were they recruited originally?
Not all of them. As Mr. Nair stated, we've had a couple leave. We're in the process. I think we have 4 new ones starting April 11th. So it's still an ongoing process. I will say that there are, I think, 4 or 5 that have been here pretty much since EFIT's been here. And they're definitely the ones that are standing out, that Mr. Nair said are moving through the phases, that they've been here the longest.
Now, when a civilian investigator, I mean, you said that some of them left for other departments, but they're civilians. So how can they leave within the APD when they're civilians? I thought that was a unique civilian position.
So we ran into an issue with that because we didn't forecast that happening, actually. So we did have one apply for another position within the department and did interview and get that position. we kind of ran it through city legal and all that. We've kind of fixed that loophole now. I will say that we didn't foresee that happening, and it kind of jumped up on us. So we did lose one that way. I don't think that's going to happen again.
How are they received generally as compared to the sworn investigators?
Once again, I will go with surprisingly well. I don't think we really anticipated it going as well as it has. They are received well by their coworkers, by their supervisors. They are treated as equals. I've been to trainings with them. I've seen how they're treated. They get along well with everybody. Like I said, I didn't foresee it going as well as it has, and I'm very happy with the progress the civilians are making.
Good.
I will tell you the reports we get back from our EFIT field investigators with the civilians are amazing. An old gun story. If you never shot a weapon as a firearms instructor, we can teach you how to shoot a weapon. While they do have investigative experience, they haven't had law enforcement investigative experience, and they soak everything in. We were at an OIS, officer involved shooting, last Saturday. Actually, we had two last week, unfortunately. And I will tell you, the civilian investigators, when they don't know something, they ask questions. They're not afraid to ask questions. They're not afraid to ask EFIT. They're not afraid to ask their supervisor. So we're seeing the civilians really blend in very well. We've had no issues with field officers and how they treat a civilian internal affairs investigator compared to a sworn internal affairs investigator. So I think in the interview process, they're well respected. In the transition process that I spoke about, we have half and half, right? We have half of our people in the transition process are civilians, because they're tenacious. They're asking the right questions. They're really digging in. So I think that we're seeing a lot of improvement on that front.
Let me clarify something, because I wasn't sure I heard it. The civilians aren't armed, are they? They can't be armed, can they? Like, have guns? Can
No,
they?
they cannot.
No, I didn't think so. I must have misheard. Well, Ms. Lowe, I have a couple of questions. One is from a gentleman called Mr. Anderson. I hope I have your name right, saying, can you share some of your findings, which is actually where our next question is going. We are asking if you can A, share your findings, and B, incorporate them into training and learning experiences for other officers. So if we're ready to go there, Philip, or if you think if you want to hear more on this level.
That's fine.
And the other question, which is not really relevant, I'm sorry, it's not really relevant to this meeting tonight, but we certainly can ask it another time. Wanting to ask when the monitor can leave, when we can send the monitor on its way, and how can we alleviate tax dollars for citizens. That's really a question for Ms. Martinez, our AUSA, and it's not something we can address here, but I can certainly find out and address it via email. On the other thing, while I'm talking, is if you need the link to the EFIT report, the February EFIT report, please email us at cpcvalley@gmail.com, and I can send you the link to the report. It's not that long a read, and it's very informative and very educational. Unlike the monitor's report, which is a very long read, but if you want to read the monitor's report, I can send you the link to that also. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. The independent monitor can depart when APD comes into full and substantial compliance with the reforms in the CASA. So that's the answer to that question. I haven't seen, Ms. Schwartz, that's again a question for Ms. Martinez, and it's something that we can certainly have that another meeting. How close are you to being in full compliance with your portions of the CASA? Is that a question for EFIT, Ms. Schwartz, or is it a question for AUSA Martinez? Or is that a question for Deputy Chief Lowe? Oh, it's for EFIT. How close do you think you are in being full compliance with your portions of the CASA?
Well, it's not really compliance with the CASA. It's more of compliance with the process narrative. And we're making progress in that. I think the progress is coming in is that we have 90 days in which to complete an investigation, and other than the 11 cases and 2 OI officers involved shooting, where we went to the court and asked and informed the court and asked for an extension on that, we're getting there. So right now, as of last week, we're at 88.10 days in closing cases out. Our investigations are averaging about 54 days. We've had some bottleneck at the supervisory level in getting the cases through there. When the deputy superintendent came up to the 5th floor from IAPS. He and I had a meeting. We talked about that. We talked about the amount of time, and he put an order out that the sergeants would clear those cases within 15 days. Since that order has gone out, we're close to it. We're down to about 17.9 days. So we're seeing things happening quicker. I think the mindset was that if you give somebody 120 days or 90 days or 60 days, they'll take that, right? So I can finish it whenever I can finish it. We'd like to see these timelines go down. We think they can. I think a relatively simple level 2 use of force, can be investigated a lot quicker than 60 days. And we're working towards that goal of having these cases and showing the detectives and the investigators and the command staff of IAFT that these cases can be investigated quicker. If you have a level 2 case, finish it quick, get it done. We don't want speed over quality. We never want to jeopardize the investigation, but if we can get something happening. Last week, we went out on a lot of use of force investigations. It was just a crazy week. There was 2 OISs and a host of other cases. So, if you can clear those simple ones up faster, if something happens, you have the bandwidth to take care of that and really concentrate on the more complex cases. So we're working with them, not only to be in compliant with the process narrative, we're working with the investigative planning, working on the interview strategies, we're working on who has to be interviewed. DC Lowe and I have been working on an OBRD plan. We've had some successes on some other officers involved shootings where EFIT has come up with a process of taking 200-300 OBRDs, 500 OBRD, video recordings.
OBRD onboard recording device.
Correct, or lapel camera, whatever, however you want to characterize it. But yes, so we put these things into buckets. We follow what has happened. I think we're seeing cases where they, when we first came in, we had tactical activations where the person in the Bearcat and the armored vehicle giving the announcements, come out, your hands up, Albuquerque police, force will be used against you, who didn't witness force was being interviewed. Why, right? So we've really are focusing on keeping the officers on the street, interviewing the people we have to, having a solid investigative plan, getting the cases closed as quickly as we can, but with the quality needed.
And as
So-
I understand, by the court stipulated agreement, your time has been extended to how?
So, yeah, so there was amended stipulated order or agreement between the city and the Justice Department and APD. That was submitted to the court and signed on Monday. In that agreement, it extends EFIT for 2 years and also has EFIT in charge of looking at the backlog cases that are in existence. I can assure you that EFIT will not be here 2 years. That we will, we will transition EFIT, we're calling it EFIT 1, back to IAFD, as quickly as possible. I think the reason everybody agreed, and I agreed to it also, the 2-year time frame is to have everything kind of end at the same time. But I think and to give us the latitude if something does happen, but I don't expect EFIT 1 to be here 2 years.
You don't love the green chili?
Where
Where did we go wrong?
Someone told me that it's not it is really the land of entrapment. Once you come in, they don't let you leave.
You're enchanted, then you're entrapped. That's very true.
While I'm working probably 6 days a week on EFIT matters, I do get that 7th day to DC Lowe's chagrin to go hiking or. She doesn't want to she wants to make sure I don't get lost somewhere, and she has to send out the helicopters. But, I do enjoy it here. I'm here 3 weeks out of the month, usually. Someone from my executive team is here. Bill's here, for a solid week. Mr. Bone is here every 3 weeks for a week. So, we're totally invested into this process. And we'll make sure that we transition it as quickly as possible. Before EFIT, I was scuba diving 3 times a month and enjoying my life in Florida. So at some point, I'd like to get back into the water.
Just one very quick and very basic question. How many on the EFIT team?
So currently we have the executive team are 3 people. We have some support staff, but most of our team is, we have 3 teams of 4 that rotate. So our teams come in for 3 weeks. So they're in town for 3 weeks responding to calls. When they rotate out, new team rotates in. So there's never ever a gap of time. When they go back we have people from all over the country. So when they go back home, they're still working daily with the IAFD detectives on making sure that these cases are being closed out, transitioning cases that need to be interviewed from one EFIT investigator to the other. So talking amongst, the teams is very, very common. Probably, I would say every 2 months, we have an all hands meeting where everybody in EFIT gets together. They all get the quarterly reports. They all know what's the weekly reports that we issue to the Justice Department, to APD, and to the monitoring team. So everybody's on track of what's happening. I will tell you that I have pretty much an open door with Deputy Superintendent and DC Lowe. We talk often. I have very frank and candid discussions with Commander Evans and all the command staff at IAFD. I have an office at Maine, so I am there when I'm in town. I'm there at least good part of the day, depending on what other meetings I have regarding EFIT. So we have a busy schedule, and we're making sure that this gets done. When EFIT first came into existence, we made the rounds to all the area commands. There was a lot of rumors going out. We quashed those rumors. new commanders coming in to, replacing other field commanders. We've met with them. We've met with most of the specialized units. We put some policies in place and some processes in place with, with the SWAT team and K9. And so, as we see things, we want to leave it obviously a better place than we found it. And I think we're making substantial progress in that regard.
One quick question, and I think this is for Commander Lowe, Deputy Chief Lowe, the commander for a long time, I apologize, and for Deputy Superintendent Cottrell. None of the cases that were not investigated in the 90-day deadline before EFIT started was subject to retroactive action, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
All of those cases, if there are any policy violations found, due to the collective bargaining agreement we have with the Police Officers Association, we will not be able to impose any discipline on any of those policy violations. We will, however, be able to use basically lessons learned from those for any training that we identify.
Here we go.
Anything like that, we will be able to use from anything that we do find in that backlog investigations.
That is a beautiful segue, because that is where we were going next. We wanted to ask about what training opportunities arise from the investigations, and are they for officers in the field, or do they come up in the academy, or both, and how are they implemented?
So yeah, that's actually very good. We actually do use lessons learned daily from patterns that we find in these investigations with EFIT's input, obviously. Short term, we do quick training videos that we do put out to the entire department that they are required to watch. Those can range from something simple like search and seizure, quick, just on-scene interviews, stuff like that. We'll do quick training videos through the academy and put those out to the entire department to view. Long term, we are working on especially our reality-based training. Issues that we're finding in uses of force, especially out of policy uses of force, if we see patterns there, we're going to work those into our scenarios at reality-based training this year. We had a meeting with the academy to go over this. The good thing is they put the academy in the same group as IA and IEPS, so we all work for the same superintendent, which is good. So then there's daily communication. So the academy is going to create, scenarios based on these out of policy uses of force, so that we can go through training and to ensure the entire department's on the same page as far as, for example, when to use an ECW and when not to. Something like that. Electronic control weapon, like a taser, intermediate weapons, stuff like that, when we can and can't use them, so that we can move towards all of our uses of force being within policy.
When I actually did the Citizen Academy, and I did do reality-based training. It was part of the curriculum, and others have, Edwina's done it, Miss Edwina's done it also. Is there more of an emphasis on reality-based training now that the IFD are in place, now that the investigations stepped up and EFIT has some input, or is it about the same as it always has been?
I would say it's about the same as it always has been. The one thing we have now is we have completed force investigations to use to go towards that training. Like Deputy Chief Lowe said, we started off strong. We kind of hit a weird wall. We weren't getting cases completed. So without that knowledge on what occurred in those cases, we can't use them for training. Since EFIT's been here, we've completed about 190 cases. So there's a lot of information in those cases that we can use for training. So it's about the same, but it's just better information now.
Is it appropriate to ask any specific patterns that you're seeing in uses of force 2 and 3, or is there?
No, I'll speak to that. I will say that about 90% of our force is within policy. So we are doing much, much better there. The about 10% that we're finding are out of policy. The mass majority of those are out of policy uses of taser. So what we're
Okay.
seeing a pattern of is people using a taser on a passively resistant person, which is out of policy.
Anything else in that 10% that causes concern? I mean,
No,
you said,
actually not. That's probably the biggest portion of that is using a taser on a passively resistant person. So that's definitely something we've talked to the academy about. They're building that into training for this year's training cycle. And I think, hopefully we can address it and get that fixed sooner than later.
I read something in the journal this morning, and I don't know if it happened here in Albuquerque or elsewhere. I don't remember. Perhaps you can enlighten me. It was a gentleman holding a telephone that was mistaken for a gun. Was that here, or was it in another part of the country?
So that was here. That was part of our last officer-involved shooting.
Can you address it in some way, how it happened?
I actually don't know because they were so early in that investigation. I actually don't know any more than that at this point.
I was wondering if you could walk us through, I was thinking about that incident in particular. If you could walk through when something like that happens, how does internal affairs get involved? Is EFIT there at the same time everyone else is there? Just walk us through a case about
absolutely.
the process. That would be helpful.
Yeah, so anytime there's any use of force, internal affairs force does respond to a level 2 or level 3. An officer involved shooting is a level 3. So they are called. We do have on call. They do respond. They also respond in conjunction with EFIT. To officer involved shootings, usually EFIT will send a supervisor as well. Obviously that's something very serious. We take it seriously. So they do respond on scene, the same thing. They have access to everything that internal affairs has access to on scene. I know there was a question earlier about why there's 2 internal affairs separations. And this is why, is instances like this. So by taking force division under the umbrella of internal affairs, they have access to absolutely everything on scene. They go to the briefings, they're able to collect all the evidence, view the scene, everything like that. And then from there, they'll go through, they'll start interviewing witnesses, work the case all the way up to interviewing the involved parties at the very end.
And the APOA is there also. That's the association, Albuquerque Association of Police. Tell me, Sean will kill me, but
Albuquerque
me.
Police Officer Association.
Don't tell him. And there's a representative from them. And there used to be, does the CPOA still show up to officer involved shootings?
They do. They send a representative as well.
CPOA is somebody else do it because my brain is toast. It's
Civilian Police Oversight Association.
Okay.
I will tell you that someone from the executive team will respond to all OISs. So not only our supervisors, but someone from the executive team is there. I was out at the last 2 OISs myself. We, as the deputy superintendent said, we attend all the briefings. We have access to everything. So these investigations run really well, and we have, like I said, we have really seasoned people. We help put together the investigative plan for IAFD on every case, but we really pay attention to the OISs and make sure that those run the way they're supposed to run.
I would hope when the investigation of the gentleman holding the telephone is more advanced, that we, as part of the CASA agreement, would hear something more about it, some more detail. We've been asking to hear more about Clyde Trevino for the last year, who is the gentleman walking up San Mateo who got shot. And so if we could get the details of any of those kind of shootings, or we can go through CPOA and get them from them, because they'll be investigating also. And they are, so to speak, our parent company. If there are some people that ask questions that I didn't see, so if there's anybody who asked a question and it didn't get asked, now is your chance to speak now or forever hold your peace.
Rowan, I think Philip and I have a couple of questions.
Go for it.
Go
Philip,
first, Dick.
No, you go. You go.
So I'll do this question. I mean, certainly the monitor will, in his reports, will say whether he thinks the department is improving in use of force. And overall, you know, that's certainly what we as citizens want to see. But I'm wondering, how does the department decide if itself is seeing improvement in use of force?
We do a couple of things. So we have the Force Review Board. So the Force Review Board is currently a board of executive level individuals, along with a representative from the Training Academy. And so we review all level 3. So those are the more serious uses of force, and then a 10% sample of level 2s, which are the ones that have either a complaintive injury or an actual injury that doesn't rise to a level 3. And so they'll go through there and they'll really take a look and evaluate if we can do any kind of referrals, right? So we look at certain things like, one, was the investigation complete and thorough? Were the applications of force, because remember, could be one case, but multiple applications of force, and we vote on each application to see if that's within policy. And then we look at supervision, tactics, training, policy, and equipment. Those are 5 areas that we look at to see if we can see if it's an officer concern. Obviously, we'll address that one officer, but if it's something that we look that can be departmental, and I'll just use equipment because that one's just a really easy one. But if we decided that we wanted them to position their cameras on their body different because all of them just kept falling off or something like that, and we made them change it, and that's an equipment issue, we'd make a referral. There'd be one person who is solely responsible for responding that to referral, and that referral has to come back to the FRB. They have to review it, the response, and see if it's adequate, and then they can close it. So we have, that's probably our best mechanism for reviewing force cases and seeing what we can do departmental wise to see if we need to change anything. We have done a lot of referrals, especially in 2020, because we started seeing a few trends, because someone was asking about trends earlier.
Right.
De-escalation was one of them.
Right.
Our officers were using orders as kind of de-escalation. And so we switched that. We had a change in policy, and then we had a refresher training for explaining everyone. So then we saw de-escalation go up, and not officers, using those verbiage in their report. So that was one of the best things that came out of FRB. And then search and seizure issues. That's always really important. So we were always constantly reviewing our laws to make sure that we need to change it. And we did some refresher off of that. So I think that's probably the best mechanism to evaluate our uses of force as a department.
How would we as citizens, find out what the department's it feels about the use of force and how it's going? And I'm asking that in part, and I'm not trying to be too negative or anything. I just don't understand that. But the reports that the department puts out with whatever it is, 300 paragraphs, is kind of dense and hard for me to look at.
Understood, and so I'm probably the one responsible for that document. So I apologize. Because when we first created it, we based it off of the settlement agreement and how it's laid out. So if you'll see the current progress report that was filed last week on, yes. And so if you see that, so we try to, and we're going to make it look a little bit better next time, but you saw that there was a little bit more graphs, so we broke it up by a section, saying out of this section, this is kind of where we're at now. And as far as where we think we stand, we began a new tool, which is called ReformStat in January. We took this tool from, I shouldn't call it a tool, it's like a platform, from New Orleans Police Department and Baltimore, who both are under consent decrees. And when we use that, What it does is we're kind of going through here and we're combing, there's 106 paragraphs that are not in operational compliance to date. And so
Right.
we're pulling those and we're breaking up by smaller sections and really dissecting the requirements of them and seeing if we think we're meeting them, if we do not agree with the monitoring team. We did put a lot of language in this last progress report that we anticipate paragraphs improving into compliance. This last IMR for 14, when it was filed, we did request the monitor reevaluate 9 paragraphs, which he did do, and he increased compliance on 5, which that's really the first time we've really kind of did that. And we're going to do it again in this IMR, depending on what we see, if we feel that we're higher or not. And the biggest part of that is we need to provide the evidence. And that's our intention for this next, for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Dick?
I think this is probably for the EFIT guys. As I read the quarterly report, it seemed to me you said that there's a first line supervisor problem, and that's paramount to the success of EFIT. And I couldn't understand what it was or who the first line supervisors are. I think maybe it was a supervision plan that weren't being approved quickly enough. But I didn't understand that. And I'm interested in what the problem is and who's responsible for it and what's being done about it.
Bill, you want to take that one?
Yes, certainly, Daryl. Thank you. Thank you for the question. The first line supervisors really are at the sergeant.
You sound like, excuse me, you sound like Judge Jackson.
Oh, I do.
Thanks for the question.
That's something we're taught in law school, to stall by saying thank you for the question and then smile. Yeah, the first line supervisors that we're referring to in our quarterly had to do with the sergeant level and how that was being administered relative to the detectives. And what we were looking for there, quite frankly, was more involvement and also being more sensitive to the time issues that we were talking about. I mean, we're at 88 right now, as we said earlier, days out of 90. Quite frankly, for me, that's still too close. And we're going to need to work on that as well. But it's a bottom to top and top to bottom process, right? So we have to make sure that the detectives / investigators are keeping, their timetable, the sergeants, and then up the line. And we noticed an issue at the sergeant level with some of the supervision that was occurring, or quite frankly not occurring, and we addressed it in that report, and we're continuing to address it very closely with IAFD as well as our EFIT executive staff. And one of the questions that came up earlier, just for a moment, if I can go back, and I know Deputy Superintendent Cottrell had addressed it. When we're talking about recruitment and retention issues, that's not unique, obviously, to Albuquerque. With the climate that we all find ourselves in nowadays, that can be an issue. We experience it here in New Jersey, in the town that I'm working with. So you see that at all levels, and you see that as it manifests itself. We saw it at the supervisory level, which was particularly at the sergeant level, and it's being addressed with IAFD and with EFIT very closely. And we have seen some progress already since that time.
I can't help but to think, and I'm not endorsing particularly this line of reasoning, but there are people who would say that the sergeant is the weakest link because the sergeant is a union person. And I don't know if you care to comment on that. I mean, it's at the front of all of our radars. When we read the paper, the union doesn't like CASA. They want to renegotiate CASA. We all know about that. Perhaps it's a good subject for another meeting. But the sergeants are union people, and you're relying on them. I mean, they're the critical link in the success, as I understand, of EFIT.
It's an interesting issue. Particularly, we see it a little bit differently here on the East Coast. All the members are, all the individuals are members of the union. What we have here on the East Coast, which you don't necessarily have, we see out there in New Mexico, is that there are different unions for different level individual. So we have what we call our superior officers union here in Montclair, which are your superior officers. So they would, your deputy chiefs, your captains, what have you. And then they're your line officers are in a separate union. In New Mexico, you have them all in one union, which creates an interesting dynamic, to say the least. That's something that, it could be a concern, quite frankly. We had, and we understand the union has their job to do. We respect that. We have our job to do as well. And when we first came in, we had, Mr. Nair and I had several discussions, if you will, meetings with union representatives and their attorneys as to what the parameters were going to be, at least for EFIT going forward, particularly when it came to interviews, because there was a lot of back and forth in interviews. There's an appropriate time and place for that. We worked that out, and knock on wood, it's been so far so good, but we have issues that come up and we address them as we go along. And that's why we're here. It's a very good point.
I take it, as I understand it, your contract was supposed to be renewed by the end of this month. I take it while you're talking, it was.
So the
All right, you want to jump in there? Go ahead.
Yeah, the current contract expires on May 2nd. We are working very closely with legal. I don't expect any issues based on my conversations today. We received a draft. We turned that draft back around to legal quickly. I know DOJ's had conversations with legal today. I don't expect any problems coming up with with compliance to the amended stipulated order and statement of work.
And then one last question, if you might, and it might be for Deputy Superintendent Contrell. The backlog cases that you're now investigating through EFIT, and the discipline is is off the table. But can there be a note in the officer's file if there is a violation of policy found? So at least there's some sanction?
According to the new collective bargaining agreement, any violations that are found out of timelines cannot even be noted in the officer's file.
So I noticed that the United States Attorney's Office, the DOJ, I'm sorry, said when Judge Browning asked, what's the point of going through all these cases if there can't be any sanction when there is a policy violation? And the DOJ lawyer said, well, we think it's of paramount importance. That's not a quote, but that's what effectively what he said. And it surprised me a little bit. What stands to be gained from going through these cases? I mean, there's 1,000 of them, right?
There's approximately 660 of them.
Okay.
Yeah, the 1,000 is combining with the original backlog that we already went through. Okay. I do think there is value in going through these. We can find, like I talked about earlier, if there's patterns of out of policy uses of force that we can use for training. Yeah, we can identify a lot of other issues. If there's anything criminal in these that went unnoticed, we can investigate any criminal activity if there is anything found in these backlog force cases. So there is value of going through them.
Are you focusing on the officers who are still with the department, or are you including cases that involve officers who are no longer with ABD?
We will still look at all cases, even including cases with officers that are no longer with APD.
For the ones that where the officer is still with ABD, and a policy violation is found, will there be a counseling, either informal or formal, if there's not a note in the file?
I don't know if we've decided exactly how that's going to be handled yet. I know Mr. Nair and other city legal have talked about that. I don't know how far that's going to be able to go because of the wording in the new collective bargaining agreement. Like I said, the training is probably the biggest thing that we are going to get out of this backlog is out of policy uses of force, stuff that we can use to ensure that it doesn't keep happening down the road.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Philip?
Is there, just on this same issue, is there a process? I'm not understanding, is there a process going on right now looking at the 667 backlogged cases? Or is there more, and if not, is there a timeline for when that's going to be addressed?
There is a timeline for it. It actually is addressed in the new EFIT stipulated order. Since EFIT's going to be the ones going through and doing the investigation, they'll have 24 months to complete them and get through them. And I'm sure Mr. Nair would like to jump in on that and speak to it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so the new stipulated order, the exhibit to the new, the amended stipulated order has the statement of work, the SOW, for the backlog cases, and I would suggest that you take a look at that. Within a month from Monday, Monday it was signed, so we have to come up with a plan on how and the methodology of how we will be attacking that. This will not affect EFIT 1. None of the detectives that are assigned to EFIT 1 or our investigators assigned to EFIT 1 will be doing backlog cases. There'll be a whole new 2 teams with supervisors brought in to specifically work on that. Obviously, the executive team, myself, Bill, and Daryl will be overseeing that, closing those cases out, doing the command review. There are specific reports that have to be filed, both with the court. We're working out the details now on, we're currently interviewing some people, finishing up our interviews to retain these people for EFIT 2, as we're calling it. And so we'll have to issue quarterly reports. We'll have to issue reports on every case that will go to the executive staff. And so, there's a process in place for the investigation of the backlog. I think, as the acting superintendent said, the big takeaway is going to be training, potentially supervision, maybe reassignment. So there are a lot of, we can make recommendations in our reports back to the command staff. What they do with those recommendations will totally be up to the command staff. But we will be making recommendations based on our investigation on those backlog cases.
We have a question about the timeline for OIS, officer involved shootings. And I suspect that part of it, the timeline has to do with these specific cases, but is there a general timeline from the start to finish?
Yes.
Or is it all per case?
So whether it's a level 2 or an OIS, these cases have to be completed within 90 days.
Okay.
For extreme circumstances, we had 2 that we involved. We had 2 cases, one OIS, but this officer was involved in another case, and he was injured pretty badly. So again, we'll have to go to the court and file that we needed additional time and why. Again, we need the involvement of DOJ on that, the monitoring team, the CPOA. So again, it's collective effort. But OIS cases don't change at this point with the timeline set by the court. I will tell you that, we've had conversations about best practices, about stopping an investigation or just doing some interviews up until the point of a declination letter issued by the court. We've talked about best practices that around the country, but it's a little different here in Albuquerque, the MATF. We'll do the criminal part of it. We have to finish ours within 90 days as it stands now.
MATF?
Help me here, Zach.
Multi-agency task force.
Agency task force, thank you.
It's made up of the state police, Albuquerque PD, the sheriff's office,
Right.
that respond to all officer-involved shootings, and they look at it from a criminal end. We look at it from a use of force and administrative end.
I'd like to ask, in the description of what happens when there is a level 3 event, and it sounds like 6 or 8 or maybe more investigators show up at the scene and begin investigating. Who's responsible for coordinating that? Who says, you talk to a witness, you talk to the officer, you take pictures? Somebody must coordinate that. How is that done?
As far as just a simple level 2 or level 3, when IFD gets on scene, the policy requires that a sergeant had already shown up and done an on-scene investigation prior to. So a lot of that stuff's already done. Now, as far as an officer-involved shooting, there's actually a lot of people that show up to that. We have criminalistics go out. As Mr. Nair said, we have multi-agency task force show up. We have representatives from IFD and EFIT show up. Representatives from the APOA show up. So everybody shows up. Actually, everybody has very distinct jobs that they're required to do. Everybody has their role and they know what it is. So they actually run very smoothly. But yeah, I will say that there's a lot of people there, a lot of stuff going on. They're a little chaotic, but we do have everybody shows up and actually has their very distinct role to do, such as, we have our crime scene people taking pictures, collecting evidence. We have multi-agency task force identifying witnesses. We have IFD identifying witnesses and getting admonishments done. So it's a lot going on, but everybody does have their role.
Do you say admonishments?
Yeah, so on a force investigation, all involved officers and witness officers are given what's called an admonishment, so they don't talk about the use of force prior to being interviewed about it.
I'm sorry, I got distracted because a whole fleet of bike cops just went past my window. Like a parade. It was amazing.
That's all right. That's all right,
So
Ron.
cool. Sorry, but to be distracted. So
Admonishments on a use of force, when IFD shows up, they do admonish all involved officers, witnesses, and involved parties, just so they don't discuss the use of force until they're interviewed about it.
just so they don't talk about it among themselves, so
Yes,
to
ma'am.
speak. Is there anything else? Are there any other questions? Anything else to? Oh, I have something. I was a teacher, and I say this with no small amount of bitterness, that when I was a teacher, at least 1 month of every month, I had to go to some kind of training or another. I was so trained, it was ridiculous. Can you give me the amount of training that that an officer not in the academy, that the officers out in the field get? How many courses, how many classes do they take each year? I mean, I've been told as little as 2. Oh, okay.
Are you talking use of force specific, Rowan, or are you talking
I'm
just in general?
talking general training, but also use of force specific.
Use of force, we have to have a minimum of 24 hours a year.
Okay.
And our supervisors have to have a minimum of 32 hours a year. But keep in mind, we also have New Mexico DPS, Department of Public Safety requirements. So we have maintenance of effort. So right now we're right in the middle of an 8-hour training course where we'll get like hate crimes training, missing persons, crimes against children. So there's all that. So, I mean, we're looking at about probably about 100, 120 hours when you add everything together in order, because that in turn includes our firearms qualification training. So there's a lot throughout the year.
Okay. I got the gentleman's question wrong, so I'm going to do it again. The CASA requires the CPOA to do meaningful, timely reviews. They're currently looking at a case from 2016. So what's going on there? Nobody's from the CPOA here, but can you address it?
I can't, because I can tell you we submitted it to the CPOA, and so I mean, I don't want to speak for them, so I'm not sure.
We'll address that, Mr. I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. I'm so sorry, Mr. Erasmus. So if that's close to the question you asked, I apologize if it isn't. That's really a question for the CPOA, and we can forward that to the CPOA and find out for you. And then somebody's asked for a link to the APD training manual. Is that possible to get that link? Is it online?
No, we don't have the training manual online. I would have to see if the division has a training manual. I know a lot of them do, and most of them I'm familiar with, but the training, for some reason, I don't know if they independently have a manual for their division. I'll look into it.
Thank you. There's another question from the same gentleman. What is the timeline for an OIS investigation to go from IAFD to the FRB and then on to the CPOA? FRB is the Force Review Board. I think we went over all the other acronyms.
Yeah,
So
we have. Yeah, we do have a lot of acronyms. So we already explained the timeline it takes for an investigation. From there, once it's completed, that investigation gets sent to the FRB unit, which is under my bureau. And from there, we have, per the CASA, we have 30 days to get it in front of the FRB. I will say that we're doing better, especially with EFIT being here, because we're really trying to keep on track of the cases they're closing. But we do have a backlog for them. And then, but once FRB hears the case and we have a presentation and it's actually formally closed, we have 15 days to get it over to the CPOA for their review.
And the CPOA has representation in the Force Review Board also.
They do. So right now we have their interim executive director on the board.
Yeah. Anything more? This has been fabulous.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Herlock and Mr. Nair. Or are you Mr. Nair? And thank you so much, Acting Deputy Superintendent Cottrell.
Thank you, Roland.
One day that will change. And thank you so much, Deputy Chief Lowe. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Of course, you're welcome. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to see the rest of you. I wasn't picking her out as my favorite. So we're done with this section and we're just going to go on to our local area command concerns. So feel free to exit, and thank you so much.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.